Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, September 17th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today in our virtual studio by Scott Milne, who, as many of you know, is the Republican Party's candidate for the lieutenant governorship. Mr. Milne, welcome back to the News Project. Pleasure to see you again.
Yes, more fun if we were live as we were last time we spoke, Andrew, but great to be with you.
Well, we'll
Thanks for the opportunity.
We'll do the best we can with this setup here, and I'm starting to get a lot more used to it than I was a few months ago. For those of you who aren't familiar with Milne's background,
you're looking good.
Thank you. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mr. Milne's background, he is the president of Milne Travel. It's an independent, family-owned travel management company. He has been the president. He's worked there since the mid-1980s, and it was a business that was started by his family in 1975. And might also add, Mr. Milne comes from a political background. I believe your grandfather, as well as both your parents, were members of the state legislature, and your father's cousin, James Milne, was the Secretary of State from 95 to 99. So I guess politics runs in the family. Mr. Milne, of course, as many of you will remember, ran for the governorship himself in 2014 and almost pulled off what would have been an amazing upset, losing by only about 2,000 votes to the then incumbent Governor Peter Shumlin. Also took a try at the U.S. Senate in 2016 against Pat Leahy. And is now back for a third try for the lieutenant governorship position. He lives in North Pomfret, Vermont, over on the other side of the state there. And again, Mr. Milne, welcome back to the News Project. Great to have you with us, and thank you for making the time for this discussion. I wanted to start off by letting you talk a little bit about this policy document that your campaign released earlier this week, Progress Vermont, it's called. It's a roughly 30-page document that sets forth some of your ideas about what you'd like to see happen in the state should you be elected. And I guess, why don't you give us an overview of what's in there and what are some of the main points that you're talking about in it?
Absolutely, and thanks very much for the kind introduction. It's always good to be physically more so, but now virtually in Bennington County and southwestern Vermont. Andrew, I appreciate talking about my mom and my dad, both of whom were extraordinary role models for me and public servants. Also, you mentioned my grandfather, Henry Milne, who ran George Aiken's office in Washington for a little while after serving as a Vermont legislator. But I also just want to talk a little bit about, the importance of bipartisanship. And it's not like you have to learn that from people you share DNA with, but clearly I've learned that throughout my whole life. The first Milne in America was my great-grandfather, who was pushed a wheelbarrow around in a granite shed in Barrie. He died a little before his 50th birthday of black lung disease. He was lucky because in the 1930s, men that worked in the granite industry, his average life expectancy was 42. My great-grandfather made it till he was 50, but had a great public service spirit himself. He was a Republican alderman in the city of Barrie, sort of one of these facts that are lost to history, but some would argue the last socialist mayor in America before Bernie Sanders, although I think there's some thought that there were a couple of socialist mayors in Milwaukee and places like that in the 40s. But in the 1930s, Mayor Suter in Barrie was a socialist mayor. My great-grandfather was a Republican city alderman. And they worked across the aisle as bipartisan partners to do what was important for the city, what was important for the people, and what was important for, the families of Barrie. And unfortunately, at that time, what was most important was helping widows raise families without husbands. So many people were dying in the granite industry. So I just wanted to point out, I got a few generations before me, and my number one goal in this plan, in this campaign, and with the Revitalize Vermont, Progress Vermont plan that you mentioned, Andrew, is to make sure that the work and public service that was put in by those that came before me is reflected in what we say and what we do, myself and the folks that are surrounding me on this campaign. I'm drawn into the race, as you mentioned, for two primary reasons. We're living in unprecedented times between this global health pandemic, which I really have to do a big shout out to Governor Scott for helping us work our way through. But very, very apparently, we're in a worst economy, worst economic crisis we've seen in 75 years as we come out of this. I saw that firsthand in my travel business. We have been here for 45 years. We were closed one day for my mom's funeral until we got to COVID. I'm sitting in an office in South Burlington, Vermont, like our 6 other offices. This office has been closed since the middle of March. We're working virtually and taking care of customers, but primarily what we're doing is helping people refund things and stay on top of rebooking things. There's a little bit of essential travel going on, but the industry's really died. So I've seen firsthand what families are going through, what Vermont small businesses are going through. That's what drew me into this race. And I believe for us to get out of this successfully, Governor Phil Scott, really needs a partner and not an adversary in the Lieutenant Governor's office. So I'm running and offering myself with somebody with over 3 decades of experience building jobs, running a small business in a very, very competitive industry. Folks in Manchester might remember Windigo Travel, a long time Manchester travel agency, who's got absorbed into our company, unfortunately, because we were unable to keep we wanted to, but the staff was all ready to retire with Knox Duvall, the proprietor of that office, actually got absorbed. Customers got absorbed into our organization, but we were unable to keep the retail office there. So, got a lot of customers in your part of the state. Got a lot of things going on there. The whole business has been upended. When we looked around and thought about how we're going to do things, and you can go to my website, scottmilne.org, and just look for Progress VT. Progress VT is a 10-pillar outline of what I would argue are the 10 most important things that Vermont needs, and very specific proposals on how to get Vermont back on the right track. And I'm not talking specifically about my opponent with this, but I will say that these are not, just things that you can put on a bumper sticker. They're not slogans. These are well thought out, specific proposals, in some cases to bring real and broad relief, and in some cases to just get the ship moving in the right direction. But there's 60 specific proposals, and everything from protecting our most vulnerable, revitalizing rural Vermont, opening the Lieutenant Governor's office, growing our workforce, reforming healthcare, expanding educational opportunity, securing our environment, streamlining state government, valuing entrepreneurs, and tackling affordability. So there's 10 specific things that we think Lieutenant Governor Scott Milne can play a good role in helping Vermont get some good things done over the next couple of years. I'd look forward to support from folks in Bennington County or wherever else you might be listening to this today, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about it with you, Andrew.
Well, one of the points that caught my eye when I was reading through it yesterday was the section on rethinking education funding. It sounds like you're trying to make another run at trying to stabilize education and property taxes. What's contained in the idea there around the rethinking the education funding?
In 2014, that campaign where we, again, I think most Vermonters that know me from beginning in 2014 when we lost the closest governor's election in 200 years to a powerful incumbent named Peter Shumlin. Although the main issue that was kind of a proxy referendum in that election was what I think most Vermonters agreed with me on was Peter Shumlin's reckless experiment with our healthcare. Underlying that, we had a few very specific proposals. The most all-encompassing proposal we had in that was an education plan that just totally talked about restructuring the way education works in Vermont from the top to the bottom. And, one of the things that people forget about, or we need to keep in mind, is we had this very powerful Supreme Court decision 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, I guess, the Brigham decision, which basically defined, in the Vermont Constitution, everybody is afforded equal access to education. Simplifying a little bit, the way that decision has been implemented is that equality equals dollars spent. And so we went from a system where each town funded their own schools. In a ski town, like say around Mount Snow, you could have a $100,000 house and have a $100 tax bill. Whereas in a, poor working town like, Bennington, you'd have a $100,000 house and have a $10,000 tax bill. The Brigham decision and Act 60 changed that into essentially a statewide property tax. One of the ramifications for that is that you have folks make local decisions on what they want to spend, but 251 other communities around Vermont are getting the bill for it. 2014, we had a really specific plan based on a very sound legal opinion that you could still be compliant with Brigham by regionalizing these things. And we talked about regionalizing spending around these, what we then called rural education administrative districts, essentially founded around the tech centers. I think there's 13 or 14 of them in Vermont. And we had all kinds of cool ways, I would argue, of incentivizing folks. The less money you were able to spend and get quality educations, the more money you would have to put towards college for people in your district, the more money you'd have to do some other things. The bottom line on the program that we're talking about this year is Vermont has the arguably, but probably by most accounts, the highest average student spending for K through 12 in the nation. Although we've got great schools, great teachers, really good students, our results are average. Our results are in the middle. So the Beck plan is a good plan that's out there, and would like to, maybe get it on the table in a bipartisan manner. Let people take a look at it and see if we can use it as a foundation for moving forward. It won't be nearly as bold as what we talked about in 2014, but it'll get us towards a more affordable Vermont.
One of the big issues this year and last as well, I suppose, was how to finance the state colleges around the state. So I gather that this year the state budget that the legislature and the governor are probably converging on contains about $20 million in bridge financing to help them get through this coming year. I guess my question is, what do you think should happen after that?
Great question, Andrew. And not to just be self-promoting, but just want to remind everybody, please go to scottmilne.org. Check out 60 specific proposals designed to be under 10 umbrellas of what we think are the 10 most important kind of pillars of what we're doing, but under expanding educational opportunity in Vermont. We specifically talk in Progress VT about the higher ed system in Vermont. I think we've got two essential proposals there, Andrew. First of all, we do need to get this one-time fix. Hopefully we can figure out a way of using some of this federal CARES money or COVID money. But more importantly, we need to tie the state subsidy, the state contribution towards higher ed to a cost of living going forward. So there's automatic increases. And then, again, one of the things that I think we need from Scott Milne administration is somebody in the Lieutenant Governor's office who actually has experience surviving in a very, very competitive industry. How do you create an organization that thrives in higher ed nationally? In my travel business, not to drop names, but we manage travel for everybody from Harvard University to all kinds of well-known people. And it's not a Vermont problem, it's a national problem. Higher ed is a industry that's going to be under stress for a while. But I've got 3 decades of running a business. It's in one of the most stressed industries on the planet. And we're probably 30 times bigger now than we were 25 years ago. I got into, bought a small branch from my parents in the late 80s with one part-time employee, and coming into COVID, we had nearly 100 employees. So it's not an exact to exact, but we got a specific plan in Progress VT about higher ed. I come into it from a background of knowing how to be flexible, adaptable, and survive. And I'm looking forward to putting all of my energy into helping the Vermont college system thrive and become the important part. Also, not to go back to Progress VT all the time, but also as we talk about opening our economy and increasing jobs and revitalizing things, obviously having a good connection between the state with education on the state college side, and then occupational training, licensing, all kinds of things like that. They're talked about in our Progress VT plan, as well as a couple of the 60 pillars.
What do you think should be included in the final version of the revision of Act 250 once we get past the short piece here about working on recreation trails and things like that? What direction should it go in?
Although obviously many people don't know who I am, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk to those of you that are in that camp. A lot of people that do know me either know me from the Shumlin race or know me from my Milne travel background. But I'd like to just point out to voters, you get like 2 for 1 with Scott Milne. Not only do I know Main Street small business in the travel industry and have 3 decades of being successful there, but over the last 20 years, I had this altruistic vision of doing a couple things. One, being able to prove that you could be a good guy and be a builder and not have to be conniving with planning boards and things like that and get things done. I bought a piece of land right at the I-89 Route 4 intersection in Hartford, Vermont. We had a vision of building a incubator space, a job incubator, as part one of a development that then would have had, over 100 units of workforce housing. And I worked for several years with the Hartford Planning Commission, made a lot of concessions, really, really good people on that board. We did business on a handshake. We came out of that with a unanimous approval. I had investors lined up to put $30 million of private money into Vermont. Our projections were that the first phase of that project was going to create 300 jobs. And then when it got mired into Act 250 and, boils down to what does shall versus should mean in a regional plan. And then 5 years later, we lose at the environmental commission level, even though it was unanimously approved by a sophisticated planning commission in the town of Hartford, where the project was going to go. The district environmental commission ruled against us. We appeal it to the Superior Court in Vermont. We win. If you Google, like Googling things, Google Scott Milne, Quechee Highlands, I think you'll see first thing is 2016, Milne loses at Supreme Court. In 2015, Milne wins at Superior Court. So the direction question, which I'm really glad you asked, Andrew, is the direction question is Act 250 needs to enable people that are willing to invest in Vermont to be predictable, to have to be able to predict how their investment's going to go. And there's too much uncertainty. There's too many wild cards of people being able to come in and contest things. So specifically, again, in the Progress VT plan, we talk about exempting recreational trails from Act 250 jurisdiction so that those things leveraging our outdoor economy, really important part of getting our state back on track. Economically, that's a specific proposal. Farmers are an essential part of our outdoor economy, an essential part of all kinds of important parts of Vermont. But these agritourism and accessory businesses on farms, given tractor rides or things like that, even simple things like that require Act 250 permits. So we're calling to have those exempted from Act 250 permitting. There's also specific enterprise zones around Vermont that we are calling on to make sure Act 250, as long as the builders meet certain criteria, that those are exempt from these rigorous Act 250 compliance things. But at the end of the day, I was a big fan of Act 250. I think it's one of Vermont's great achievements. But Act 250 was designed in your neighborhood, in just outside at Mount Snow. It was designed to enable communities that didn't have the sophisticated planning capabilities to not be just run over by big, powerful out-of-state corporations. In the Mount Snow case, I think it was International Paper that was trying to build condos, and the story is Dean Davis was driving around and saw sewage pipes going into the ditch on the side of the road and said, we got to do something. It was designed to give communities a tool to do what they wanted to do. It's become too much of a way for the state to oppress vision on local communities, and it's become a way for folks that don't want a competitor across town or across the street or whatever to get involved and do all these other things. We need to work towards getting Vermont back towards its original vision for Act 250, which, if I look at my personal experience in the town of Hartford, we got a sophisticated planning commission that's well-funded, that's got its own very sophisticated town plan, worked with somebody like myself and unanimously approved their plan. I think I should have been able to predictably go to investors and say, we've got this done. We got a few more things to do and it's going to get done. Instead, it was 7 years later when we were back to square zero. Or is that square one?
What do you think the state's role should be in enhancing and bringing up to modern standards broadband service in rural communities, as well as in places like Chittenden County or Burlington?
Yeah, great question. And it's a national, it's a rural America, primarily a rural America problem. It's a national problem. It's exacerbated in rocky hills of rural Vermont versus the rural plains of the Midwest, where it's much easier to get a cell tower to take care of a lot of these things. And it's something that's essential to revitalizing rural Vermont. Again, in revitalizing rural Vermont, making childcare more affordable. We've got very specific proposals about that in Progress VT. Expanding broadband and also protecting our farmers. But with expanding broadband, before I get to the communication union district, because that's a complicated one, but we've got specific proposals of what we think makes sense. For example, just exempting network equipment and communications that are used for broadband from sales tax will, ameliorate some of the expense that players would incur that would discourage them from getting into Vermont, as well as the rural nature being one of the big problems there. There's also and one of the things, if you're watching this and aspiring to run for statewide office, based on my experience, get used to sort of understanding alphabet soup of different things, and one is CBDG, even I said it wrong, CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. So Community Development Block Grants are federal programs that, federally funded programs that are given out by the state to encourage economic development. It's fully appropriate to be using Community Development Block Grants to expand broadband. Yet I went back and looked over the last several years of all of the grants in Vermont, Andrew, and none had been used towards broadband. So that's something that is an easy thing that we can change. Finally, regarding the communication union districts, I support this concept. We really need to focus on drawing down federal dollars to support them. I will say, though, just to folks, because I think it's important to be transparent with everybody, it's something that I'm learning about. It's not something that I've got a deep level of experience in. Clearly, I'll be along as Lieutenant Governor to celebrate success, and it's something I'll be an advocate for every Vermonter and working through this broadband issue. But I've heard these differing so an analogy is, so the communication union districts are regional districts set up around Vermont to get broadband working in their districts. They're probably going to have some coaching. They're probably going to have a lot of standard operating procedures that are similar to other ones. But as you said, they don't have taxing authority. They got to get the money from somewhere. Some people it's going to be easier. Some people it's going to be tougher. An analogy is if we built the interstate highway system by letting every town or county decide how the highway was going to go through their town or county, we might still be working on it, right? So it's right now the communication union districts are the horse to bet on. But my two basic political philosophies, which if you remember, Andrew, are the exact same thing we talked about in 2014 when I was talking to you about Peter Shulman, is the more locally decisions can be made, the better. But more importantly, I'm not running on pushing a philosophy or political ideology on people. We need to follow the facts, follow the data, and make decisions practically. We need to spend the people's money like it's our own money. So I'm not, tied to communication union districts. If it turns out there's a better way to do it, I'm looking forward to learning about that. I've talked to some very smart people over the last month who have questioned whether the communication union district model is the best way to move forward. Right now, it's what I think is the best way to move forward. It's something that I'll be working hard to support and make sure that we're looking at whatever other options might be out there.
Earlier this week, Governor Scott vetoed the Global Warming Solutions Act that the legislature had passed. What do you think is the alternative to that?
First of all, appreciate the question. I think it's a misguided bill. Its name, is designed like all these bills to make folks feel good, but the Global Warming Solution Act is not a solution, and it really does very little good. The bill disadvantages our people relative to our neighbors, and it won't do anything to impact the problem. What's going to happen is taxpayers are going to be on the hook for increased costs of living in Vermont. Taxpayers are going to be on the hook to pay for lawyers that want to sue us. And it sets a really dangerous precedent, I believe, that future legislators are going to have to deal with, and I think are probably going to come to regret. So bottom line is I think Governor Scott was right to veto the bill. But when it comes to what can we do, we need to be focusing more on incentives and less on mandates from Montpelier. We need a sales tax holiday on electric vehicles and energy efficient equipment to empower Vermonters to reduce our carbon footprint. State government should also lead by example, and what's good for the goose is gander. Walk the talk, so we need a higher proportion of state vehicle purchases to be hybrid or EVs, and additionally, let's while we're at it, let's make sure we're aligning our renewable energy goals with our capabilities. Andrew, it's something that people don't talk about, but it's atrocious to me when you look at how renewable energy is played out in Vermont. In northern Vermont, we've got bureaucracies that have approved these very controversial wind projects, and they're producing more electricity than Vermont can use because nobody bothered to check and make sure we had the transmission lines to get that energy to market. So Global Warming Solution Act, trusting more bureaucrats to do more things like they did with this Sheffield wind project where electricity is going to waste after we scarred our ridgelines, doesn't make sense. My campaign is about simple, common sense steps that we can take to preserve our environment, to make our state better, without breaking the budget or pushing struggling Vermonters to the edge. The Progress VT plan talks about 60 specific ways we can do that. I'd love to come down to Bennington County and meet with you face-to-face before long, Andrew. Love to be part of, if anybody, Rotary clubs or anybody watching this has got an opportunity either by technology like this or in face with a mask on to come down and talk to you. It's an important part of Vermont. It's a part of Vermont I'm really looking forward to serving as Lieutenant Governor. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, all right. I got a funny feeling we could talk for another half an hour really easily about a whole bunch of other issues that are kicking around out there, but we'll have to leave it there for today. I want to thank you again, Mr. Milne, for being with us to share your thoughts and ideas about where you think the state ought to be headed. And good luck out there on the campaign trail. And perhaps we'll see you down at the studio one of these days in the near future.
I hope so. I really hope so. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and good to see you.